Welcome to the Heat of Command podcast, Mastering the Art of Fire Service Leadership,
where we, your hosts, aim to teach you how to use introspection and self-reflection to be your most authentic, genuine self, leader, and human being.
And now, here are your hosts. This is Kyle Matusik.
And Carrie Henderson. Thanks for joining.
And welcome back to another exciting episode of the Heat of Command podcast. Today, we are fortunate to have a guest with us, Christy Lynch from the Bolingbrook Fire Department, where she is a lieutenant and the president of the Fire Service Women of Illinois. And today, we're going to talk all things leadership with someone. So, Christy, welcome, and thanks for being with us. And why don't you give us a second and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you guys for having me. As you said, I work for Bolingbrook Fire Department. I've been there for 20 years. I've been in the fire service for 27 years. Started fresh out of high school when I was 18. Kind of bounced around a little bit in the rural part. I grew up in Minooka, worked there for a little bit, did a little bit of the contract fire medic stuff. Back when testing was, you showed up somewhere with 400 other people and they were maybe making a list and you might have one spot on it. So it took a little bit, and then I got hired full time with the Village of Bolingbrook. I've been promoted now. This will be my 4th year. I sat in a lieutenant upgrade position for probably 10 years before promotion, so sort of filling that role before then. And then additionally, I do some work with the Fire Service Women of Illinois. I'm currently the president of that organization. We're a non-for-profit, and our goal is to provide networking and training opportunities for women across the state of Illinois. I have 4 kids, and I also teach an EMT program for a vocational center, which caters to high school aged kids. So kind of on the front lines of what we're going to be seeing in the next few years, kind of hit the fire service. So it's very interesting. Gives me a different perspective for sure.
Yeah, you sound busy. Where's that EMT program at, the vocational?
It's in Romeoville.
Oh, okay.
We serve 8 area high schools. So if you're familiar with this area, we serve all of the Plainfield school districts. We serve Bolingbrook, Romeoville, Lockport, Lamont, Reed Custer, Braidwood, Custer Park. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody in there, but yeah, we serve quite a few high schools out here.
Carrie's like, oh yeah, I know all those areas really well.
Right, for sure. I mean, it touches a little bit of the suburban area and then a little bit more of the rural area as well. So it's a wide swath and pretty diverse demographically.
We should have interviewed her for the Gen Alpha episode about what's coming next into the.
I have a lot. I have some of that, right? So I get that at where I teach. I have some of those in my own house. And then obviously where I work, we have, the demographic that everybody's dealing with. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, we'll get into some stuff, but real quick, I want to hit on like the rural area that you're a part of, because I'm just curious. Do you see a difference in firefighter recruiting retention in the more rural area versus our suburban area closer to the Chicagoland area?
Yeah, I think it is different. I think one sort of benefit that the rural agencies have is that if kids are interested in the fire service, they then can access these departments through volunteering or even explorer programs, which helps in that bridge gap of those helicopter flying over, of those years that we have after they graduate high school and then can't hit 21. So they're able to fill that gap, those volunteer agencies, in a way that we're really not able to capture in those career agencies. So I think it helps them to keep up their numbers. I know quite a few departments around here that have explorer programs or have volunteer agencies that have quite a few number of younger kids that, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this with your testing that, those numbers just aren't there.
Yeah, it really is a very interesting recruitment strategy, because I'm in Western King County and Elburn Countryside Fire Protection District, and like their staffing levels are fine. But they start when they're in high school, and most of the people who take the test were in their Explorer program, did their Fire 2 or Basic Ops firefighter, did their EMT all through Elburn, and now they're full timers. So like they've created it from, before they're even eligible for the job, and they have no issues out here in Western King County, the more rural areas. But once you get in the suburban area, like they don't have any of this. So you're not building up.
Such a disconnect of that. And, agencies that do have these Explorer programs are doing better. So, even if you're not volunteer, like Lockport by us has a great relationship with those younger kids and creates that Explorer program. Plainfield does the same thing. So you get to them when they're young, you can keep them kind of excited and keep them engaged for that period of time from when they graduate at 18. Because, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but here in Illinois, you can't get hired till you're 21. So
That's
this
not
is,
the same for us.
yeah, so that's a huge challenge here. And I know that there is a committee that's working on some legislative things. And I know that this is part of that conversation because it is a real problem because I see it with the high school kids I teach because I have to counsel them on like, what should we do next? And even if they go to paramedic school right after, which is usually what I tell them to do, there's still, again, there's that gap. What are they going to do? And this, I think, is where we're losing some of these kids and they go do something else or they start, working somewhere else because they're just sort of holding and waiting to hit 21. And that's where volunteer agencies or combination or those places can keep them a little bit where we just can't.
Yeah, it's interesting because it kind of parlays to where I am too. We are rural and suburban in the jurisdiction I work in. So one of our stations is pretty rural and they have a very active volunteer population and they will let members come in at 15 as student members and they get a ton of folks in a high school EMT program like yours. They can do firefighter 1 with the volunteer department and we also, so if you're on the other end of the county, you can do an Explorer program. And it's so nice because we can really set kind of the standard and expectation for them
Yeah.
very young. And this last process that we did, we hired a bunch of 18-year-olds, which is, that can be risky. And I think people were like, some of these folks, like we had to wait for them to turn 18 to like sign their paperwork. But man, they're killing it because they came up through our system. They already knew the standards and the expectations that we had. And it worked out really well.
Yeah, I think, like I said, we're going to have to move the needle on that, especially with kind of the recruitment crisis that we're having in this state, because yeah, it's just not working the way that we have it. And I've heard some of the apprehensions or hurdles are the pension system. How do we figure that piece out? Because they're starting so much sooner, and then they're going to have to do so much longer. And then, what I've heard forever is that it's an insurance issue with driving, but I'm not sure. I mean, I was driving fire engines when I was 19 for a volunteer agency. So it's like, is that really a hurdle or is it a perceived hurdle?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you're competing, so I always feel like the fire service is caught between this. Are we blue collar or are we white collar? Right. I think we're a mix of both. But if you're going to compete against trades where, not everybody's going to college and you want to consider this a trade job, you've got to take them at 18.
Yeah,
Or they're
because
going to go.
because financially, if you compare to like carpentry or electric or any of those, if you start in their path and you get involved in it, you're going to start making real money as you're doing your training
Yeah.
process. Well, we're asking them, well, you can go work on a private ambulance or maybe a fire contract, and unfortunately for us, the benefits aren't, they're not in comparison to again some of these other trades. So again, this is where I think we lose them. So they
Yeah.
so they go different routes.
Yeah, Carrie and I have talked a lot about the differences in Illinois and a lot of the hurdles that are in Illinois. And, a lot of states, you don't see those same hurdles. And it's very interesting to see the progress in some agencies versus, like talked about just kind of how we're late to the game in a lot of things. And it's like we need to catch up and we need to start looking at things because we're already late when we're extremely late. So, it's looking forward to the Gen Alphas coming in and, what are we going to do? Because we got to start setting those strategies now because they're 15 years old and we have time to initiate some strategies to try and get them in. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting time for sure. But it's really fascinating to see the difference just 20 miles, from where I live to where I work. And you're just like, they get it out here and they're doing it and it's working. A lot of times I think when we look at recruitment and retention issues, it's always this global issue. Well, this generation doesn't want to work. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. And, to me, a lot of times it's like, well, no, let's just think about, where you work. I'm in Oak Brook, you're in Bolingbrook. Why don't people want to come to the Oak Brook Fire Department? Like if we start solving that on our individual islands, for lack of better words, like we could start collectively fixing the problem. But we can't wait for the industry to make some changes. We have to look at each individual organization, and what are you going to do as an organization to start recruiting people better than the organization before. And a lot of times, sure, it could come to benefits and stuff like that, but the rural areas are doing it and they're doing it very well. So what can we take from them? And I know there's some challenges, but can't we take anything from them? But it's just that, like, that individual organization approach. What can your organization do to be more attractive and recruit people? Because that's how, you change one organization, then another, then another. And a lot of times it just seems like we're waiting on this global change to happen. And it's like, well, if we're just going to wait for a long time, we just need to ask that simple question. How do I get more people into my organization? What can we do? And start doing it, and there's going to be successes and failures.
Oh, and I think there has to be a shift in the attitudes, right? I think for so long, people came to the fire service, no problem. Like you said, we tested and there were 400 people showing up for tests, right? Like, so it wasn't an issue, but they're not coming to us now. They're not doing that. So we have to shift our mentality of we've got to go get them, right? We can't sit back and be like, they're coming, they love us. We have this to offer. They don't care. They don't know, whatever the reasons are. We have to be like, no, we have to be so active in our recruitment strategies. And I totally agree with you that as an individual, like, you're right, we can't globally change, although I think we should. Like I said, there's a committee, at least here in Illinois, that's meeting to try to figure some things out with some key stakeholders. But individually looking at your agency and what are you doing and what could you do better? I know something small that we did for our organization was we started running a youth girls camp, particularly trying to get more female applicants to our fire department. It's been about over 10 years since we've hired a female firefighter. And really a lot because there just wasn't applicants. It's not that, we were passing on them. We had lists that we weren't having female applicants. And, there's a few other women that I work with. We have 3 women left on my organization, and we all have probably 5 years left, each one of us. So I think all at the same time, you realize, like, listen, we need to do something, because I know personally, I don't want to leave. I really have this feeling like I want to make sure that there's some more female firefighters there before I leave. So we all decided, what could we do? And we developed this camp where it runs in the summer. This is our 3rd year running the camp. We have over 40 girls that participate in it from all over the area, not just Bolingbrook, but we do have a good concentration from Bolingbrook. It's been interesting. It's been challenging to put together. We're constantly evolving it. But even that is a investment in the future, because these girls are high school age, so they can be 14 through 18 to join the camp. So I'm not going to see the fruits of this for, 4 years from the time of our first camp. There's a girl in particular I think about often for this. She is now attending her 3rd year in a row. She's great. She's in my EMT program at the school. So she's doing all the key components, right? She's going to go to Western University's program in the fall. And one of the things that I'm actively going to do is just try to stay connected with her to try to get her to come back to us once she's completed her program and all of her necessary education. But it was something small that we could do. And, I think it's twofold. It's getting girls to recognize that this is even a career path, because as I'm sure you understand, a lot of women don't see this as a job for them. I'm sure you and I have had similar experiences of how we even landed in a career like this. It wasn't because I saw some female firefighter and was like, oh, I'm going to go do this, right? So part of that is getting out there and they see that. And then the other piece of that is, when your organization does a program like this, I think it sends a signal to female applicants that are out there testing for fire departments. Oh, they're investing in female firefighters, or they're investing in this for their organization. And that's something maybe I want to be a part of, or they look like somebody who might be, invested in being diverse, or, having equity and inclusion and things like that.
Yeah, that's yeah. And I'm sure we do have similar stories, because I didn't come from a fire family, or I didn't see a female firefighter. I just kind of fell into this, which, happens. But if we want to recruit more female firefighters, we can't just haphazardly let it happen. It's got to be an active process. They've got to see, folks and know that it's a career choice. And for me, and I don't know about for you, but when I first started thinking about it, I thought, well, there's no way I could have a family and do that. Like, how would I have a family and be on shift work? And so I had originally just excluded it. I was like, that's, I want to have a family eventually. And then somebody was like, well, talk to some of the girls at work. Like, there were several women before me in our department that had families, and they're like, And so once I talked to them, they're like, "Oh yeah, absolutely. It's so nice to have all the days off with my kiddos." And I was like, "Oh, I had no idea."
Yeah, it's interesting because I had a, s- I mine was different in the sense that when I decided I was going to be a firefighter, I kind of wrote off having a family. I kind of said, oh, well, that's just not going to be for me now because I'm choosing this career instead because I didn't know what it looked like. And then the original department, I was in Minooka for like 7 years, and there had only been one female there. She was there in an overlap with my time. But then I was by myself for many years. And it was volunteer. It wasn't my career path. I was working those private fire contracts. And then when I got full time at Bolingbrook, there was a female firefighter that had had a child before. She was the first on the department to have a child. They had nothing in the union contracts. They took care of her. She was given the time off. She was given everything she needed. And I was like, oh, well, maybe this is an option, right? Like, again, I literally had just written it off. Now, there's still some challenges in that, and I don't know where your guys' state's at. It's something that we talk about very often in Fire Service Women of Illinois. I get questions constantly via email, social media regarding this. I get people to reach out from fire departments asking me for language, policies, recommendations. We, I had a male union president reach out from an organization, which I thought to me felt like progress, that they had no women. They were reaching out, asking me for this information, which I thought was wonderful. But yeah, there's still some room to grow for sure on that topic. And it's one thing that when we go out and we talk to the high school about, recruitment for firefighters, man or woman, I definitely bring up that topic of having a family. And I think this schedule is fantastic for having a family. I always say it gives me the opportunity to be both a stay-at-home mom and a working mom.
Yes, I say
Yeah.
that all the time. Like, I
Yeah.
got to do both. Yes.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And our
So I love it.
chief is really amazing. And he came to me one time, and I was the health and safety chief for a period of time. And when I was doing that role, he was like, "What if we had a policy like a maternity or women's reproductive health policy, and we shared that with applicants, or we shared that with folks so that they knew
Smart.
beforehand,
Yeah.
what the benefits were that we would offer, and so that they didn't have to come into it like you, like thinking I might not be able to do this, or it might be a challenge. They knew up front how we were willing to support them."
Yeah, and that's signaling, right? Like that's signaling to everybody out there that you're an agency who cares about, those types of topics. And that's, it's interesting because being that I don't have much necessarily time left, maybe at my organization, I've only got like, 5, 7 years left. I think about too, like, what are the policies that we have right now? And do they look the way that I want them to look? I'm long past having children, but I am looking at some of those policies, and I've recommended some of those to my chief. Like we were just talking about a lactation policy that I just kind of
Mhm.
put together because, the thing is, yes, of course, there's state laws, at least here in Illinois, there's state laws that protect you. However, what you don't want is a female firefighter to come in the door and then think that these things aren't there for them and then make decisions about having children, not having children, breastfeeding, not breastfeeding, whatever those case may be, because they don't think there's a policy there. Because realistically, these women have, less than 5 years of service on the job, that they're probably going to be having children. And, those are less than 5 years. You're not trying to make any waves. You're not trying
Right.
to buck the system in any way. So if you don't think those policies are in place for you, you may be maybe you don't want to ask, right? And so you don't do something. And I don't want someone to make a decision about their family because there's a lack of a policy.
Right. And at work, we always talk about, just because the law says you have to do this, we can do this. And people can't see my hands, but we can do way more, right? We can do what's right for the employee. And I think we do a good job in our department of that. But yeah, you're 100% correct. Cause like when I was on maternity leave and I was like freaking out about breastfeeding, I'm like, how am I going to go back to shift work? Right. And, that was definitely a consideration for me. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the same thing with having kids. I was like, well, I'm not going to do it,
Mhm.
right? Because I couldn't. Because now there is a lactation policy, and I don't know if you're familiar. There was an issue with an organization in Illinois where a woman had a significant problem with breastfeeding and created a lawsuit, and it was pretty terrible. So there is a policy. There is a state law regarding it. But as you said, just because that's the policy doesn't, or the law doesn't mean that people have policies in place. And unfortunately, then people can make, decisions or, they can interpret it the way that they want to, and may not always be very conducive for that firefighter to accomplish, what they're hoping to accomplish. So,
Yeah, in our we do a regional fire academy with several other jurisdictions, and it's hosted down at a jurisdiction next to us. And now they had a female recruit that got pregnant during an academy. And so what we call it recycling, they recycled her to the next one. Well, then she was breastfeeding, so they had to make a lactation room
oh,
at
wow.
the fire
Yeah.
academy, and this was
Hmm.
all new territory. And so, they were kind of scrambling going through all that. And I think it was kind of shocking to some people, but I'm like, "You're hiring women in, like, their prime reproductive years, like, you kinda have
Well,
to think
you
it
have
might
to think
happen."
about it, right?
When
And
I
you
got
can't, and
hired
you shouldn't wait until someone's pregnant to define your policies, right? Like, and that's what you sort of hear. We're like, well, I don't have any female firefighters right now. Well, you don't know when that is going to be. So, for example, if you out here, we're a very union based state. So, if you have a union contract and you're like, oh, we'll just wait till we hire someone. Okay, cool. But what happens if your contract's a 2 to 3 year contract? You've now hired a female firefighter. She gets pregnant in that time frame before you're able to negotiate a new contract
oh,
and
gosh,
put some of those things in place. Right. Yes, of course, there's state laws and things that are, applicable by law, but it can get messy.
that's crazy. Yeah, when I got hired, it's a different fire chief now, of course, we're several fire chiefs removed, but the fire chief, like, specifically told me, he's like, "Don't get pregnant in the fire academy." I'm like, like,
We had two women myself and another female firefighter. We got pregnant at the exact same time. We
yeah.
had the exact same due date. So they sort of had a plan in place for one, but then when they were like, oh, now what are we going to do with the two of you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my department was pretty great when by the time I had been on the department for, I don't know, like 10 years by the time I had a baby, and I was actually assigned to the training academy then, and I assessed for captain 38 weeks pregnant, and that's when they didn't quite know what to do. They were like, "We don't know if we can let you do that. You need a doctor's note." I'm like, "That's no problem.
Mm.
That's no problem."
Yeah. I mean, I think I read about a legislation or a legislative issue or a legal case one time where a female firefighter was in the promotional process and the written exam was like the day that she delivered her
Yeah.
child.
Yes, I read that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then she literally signed out AMA because they would make no exceptions for her to test on a different day. She signed out AMA from the hospital, went and took her test, and then went back to the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
I know, I can't make it up.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy, and a lot of great points, being discussed, and I think could be very eye opening for a lot of our listeners just to listen to some of the real issues that are going on. So, more on kind of getting in your brain a little bit, Chrissy. Like, what are some of the challenges that you face being president, Fire Service Women of Illinois, in particularly, like with quote unquote leaders or decision makers within the fire service? Like, where's the gap, and what is the biggest challenge there to try and bridge that gap?
I mean, for our organization, I can say we've been very fortunate in that everywhere we've gone or reached out to has been super welcoming for our organization. So that's been really exciting. If I would have been involved in this, I don't even know, 10 years ago, would it be the same? I'm not sure. But we've been fortunate that way. I think I think people are understanding that, we want to move the needle when it comes to female firefighters. So I think that they're trying. And I think they look at us and think, oh, here's an organization that can do some of the things that we don't know how to do. So we're happy to kind of partner with them. The last symposium that we did that you kind of came to was that leadership symposium. And, when we talk about that, we're still behind in that, right? Female recruiting in the fire service has really stayed the same, where we're right around that 8%, hasn't really changed in the past decade. And then when you look at female leadership, that's an even smaller percent. I think I read like 6% of female fire chiefs are women. So, the question is, how do we move that needle? That leadership conference in particular came from people asking that from us, looking at how do we get more females, in the fire service to be leaders? And then, what are those roadblocks for females to be in leadership roles? Some of that is just internal, where they don't necessarily see themselves in those roles, so they don't maybe approach it. But then you got to look at, what about these promotional tests, looking at the fairness of those, one conversation that got brought up was the assessment centers. I heard you say that you are running a promotional exam here. A lot of people use the Illinois Fire Chiefs Association, and I know that they're actively looking for more females to get involved. But to be involved, you have to be at that chief officer level. So it's kind of like a catch-22. We don't have enough females in the female officer chief level, but to be an assessor, you have to be one of those. So imagine you come into a board. It would be nice if you could see yourself represented in the board that you're testing for. And again, I know that they're trying, but again, it's that catch-22. You have to be one, but we can't get you to that level. Yeah.
Yeah, Carrie and I, we talk a lot about the culture, right? And do you think it's in itself the culture of this industry that kind of discourages females to go for the job? And then if we could shift the culture, to where we can have people on assessment centers, and I absolutely being represented, but however, that don't have this mentality of a masculine industry, whatever. If we can shift a culture over time, is there a benefit to that? And then these are all loaded questions, and it's just great. The talking points, like how do we do that, to where we can shift the culture where male, female, doesn't matter anymore. Like, how good are you at the job? And let's get you there. Like what's a road to go down? How do we go down that road, collectively at a larger scale? And then if FSWI is doing anything to kind of not just recruit the females and work with the females, but change everybody else, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think relationships are super important. And I know that's the goal of our organization. We're very inclusive. Our events aren't just for women. We want anybody and everybody to come to our events. So, it's important for us to create relationships with, training agencies and other agencies to try to help, create those relationships across the board, because, changing the culture, the ideas about, females and minorities in the fire service, I think comes from two places. You have the leadership people, the people at the top, and then I think you have the new firefighters. I think the new firefighters don't see women and minorities or any of those categories as different, right? I really do think that they are sort of, for the majority, I do think that they are, whoever does the job, we don't care, right? And I think it's just that generation, what they've grown up, they're a far more inclusive generation to begin with, right?
I agree with that.
So if we continue to foster those ideas that they already have, right? That's going to help, right? And again, that's, 10, 15 years from now, those are going to be the leaders. So that'll move that. But if we talk about the other end, the leadership, that is in place, I think that, the more as senior females in the fire service, the more that we can get out there and, show them, positive relationships, showing them that we can be in these leadership roles. What values do we have to bring to the table, which is all diversity, right? Like no matter where you're coming from, your background, there's a value in those people being in leadership roles because it brings a different component to the table. This is just a small, tiny example, but, if you have a committee, I don't care what kind of committee it is, tool committees, a work, whatever it is. And if you have diversity on those committees, age diversity, race diversity, gender diversity, then when ideas are going around about, things that we're doing, take a fire department vehicle, for example. We've talked about this before where we lowered hose beds, right? And that's not just for me as a female firefighter, that's a height thing, right? And I am the shortest person in my department, but I don't work with 6-foot guys either. There are shorter individuals on my agency that was a benefit to everybody. So if you have people on those committees that are like, hey, just a second, what about this, right? And then, I think it always comes back to people's own personal biases. So, and some of that is finding ways to challenge people's own personal biases. And unfortunately, some people have to go on their journey themselves, right? And I think with age and wisdom, you start to decide, oh, okay, is this a personal bias I have, or is this something that I know to be true? When you think about, for example, a female in a leadership role, why would you think that was bad or good? And if that's the case, again, is that your personal bias? Is there really a reason why you think that they can't be in that leadership role? Or is that just you're biased about that? And where does that come from?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Gary. Go ahead.
And it's just a question I want to ask you is, eh, do you think so? Probably around the time that you and I came in, and a little bit after, because we have about the same amount of time on, there was, so much push to hire a more diverse workplace. And sometimes that was at a detriment, right? It sometimes standards got lowered. And so I think we hired people for a period of time that maybe made us look bad, right? Do you think some of that is lingering still? Or do you disagree with that altogether?
No, I agree for a lot of reasons. I think when you try to push too much of, hey, we're really focused on hiring, for diversity, I think that creates animosity because I do think it should go back to the most qualified people for the job should get hired, no matter what they look like. And I never think we should lower standards for anybody. And you can find study in department after department where they've done that for all kinds of reasons to hire, all kinds of diverse groups. And we should never do that because, again, it does create that animosity. You know, I can speak for myself in saying that I want to get hired playing by the same rules that everybody else is playing by so that way I know that, right? Like, so there's not a question of, oh, well, they got hired because we lowered the standards, right? Again, I would never advocate for that. I think we keep the standards, right? Now, do we need to look at some of those things and find out, are there places where we have holes, right, that are creating adversity for diversity to be able to get access to those things, right? So, like,
Right, right.
for here in Illinois, we do CPAT testing, candidate physical ability testing. I'm a proponent of that. As someone who did many combat challenge fire tests where every weekend I had to go do a test and they all looked different and there's different standards by this department, I'm a fan of having a standardized test across the board. And, you know, they all came together and they came up with this and said it's the best, application for the fire service. And I agree that's true. Are there things that we can do so that it is fair? Agreed. And I said this when I talked in the AFFI's podcast. One small example. So when they do the stair climb, you have to wear that weighted vest. Currently, there's only 3 sizes. And this is a height thing, right? So the smallest vest for a lot of women hangs too far down on them and it's hitting them in the legs. So when they're going to do the stair climb, they're hitting that on their legs. The weight is being shifted to their waist area. So when they come off the stair climber, they're now more gassed because the weight's not being distributed evenly in comparison to somebody where their height and that vest fits, right?
Yeah.
So if we add another vest that's smaller, right? Same weight, but dimensionally it's smaller, really all I'm doing is it's hitting me now in the same place that it's hitting somebody else who's 5'8" or 6 foot, right? And we've created, this is now fair for all of us, right? So small things like that, where that's not lowering the standard, we're making sure that the standard's applicable. CPAT is a challenge for women, unfortunately. And I think one problem for that is they don't have access to the implements, and that, a lot of boys grow up doing, labor at home, right? In those traditional gender roles where, dad's going up to clean the gutters and hey, come out here, help me with the ladder. And they may not do that for their daughters. So they don't know, they've not used a ladder. They've not done these mechanical things. So now when they go approach a CPAT, they just don't know what they're getting into. I think they get discouraged and they don't really think about, approaching it again. So I know for me personally, where I teach and we do those youth camps, it's something that we talk about, right? You've got to get physically fit. You need to get in the gym. You need to push weights, right? And a lot of girls, and you see it changing, but a lot of girls don't push weight, and you have to. And then getting access to these implements, right? So places that run CPAT practice tests so that we can start to get these girls more access to this, find out what their deficiencies are, and get to work on them.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I just sometimes think this old school mentality of we hired some women that probably maybe shouldn't have been hired, and then it set us back even more. So these guys are like, see, they should never, these women can't do the job, and it's what set us back further than it sent us forward.
Yeah, and the only thing I say that too though is that has happened for men too, right? So like there's been different hiring standards. Like CPAT's not been around forever. There's still people in the fire service right now that never took a CPAT test or had to take a CPAT test to get hired. So there's standards that have possibly been changed, on either side of that. And so you may have, male counterparts that shouldn't physically
Yeah.
be doing the job, right? So I think you can see that on both ends. Unfortunately, there's sometimes a magnifying glass on female firefighters because there are such a small percentage of those. And again, if we go back to some people's biases, thinking like, oh, they're probably gonna fail, so they're kind of looking for that to happen. But yeah, I could find all kinds of male firefighters that physically are not up for the task.
Yeah.
Christy, you said something. You said adversity to diversity, which I like that.
I know, not intentionally to rhyme.
I was like, that's
Yeah.
pretty good. And then biases, couldn't agree more with all that. But I guess my biggest question with all of that, I mean, it's something I believe, and if I would guess you would too, but there's got to be a certain population that none of what me and Carrie talk about, what we're talking about right now, they're even going to consider. And I think it might just be a cultural thing, older generation thing. They're set in their ways, whatever it is, and it comes to drawing that line in that sand and, for lack of better words, writing those people off and building your people to continue to spread your message. So kind of how do you navigate all that? And if you even agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's true, right? I think there's always going to be people out there that no matter what somebody brings to the table, they've already made up their mind and they don't care. I think you're right. You at some point you do have to write those people off because that's their problem, right? Like that's whatever their issue is, that's their issue. So, you know, our goal is to try to bring women up, whether that's training, whether that's networking, right? Like we can bring women up so that they're meeting the standards that are there and in place. When it comes to training, we need male advocates, right? So when we're doing hands-on training events, just having males there that help participate, that's twofold. A, they can see what are some ways that I can help these firefighters learn to get better at this particular skill. How can these firefighters use, their particular strengths to get this task done? And on the other side of that, it shows them maybe something they didn't see, right? That, although this firefighter didn't do it the way that I want to do it, or I could do it, I did see that they could get it done, but it's just different, right? So I think the more we do these training opportunities where we expose people to kind of what's going on there, I think that's eye-opening. And then that's word of mouth, right? So like somebody has a positive experience at one of our events or see something that then catches and it just keeps going and it keeps going. So I think that's super helpful. Being in public spaces, speaking, I think the more female firefighters that we have in leadership roles that have an opportunity to get into some of these spaces are exclusively male dominated, like the chief's roles, for example, getting women in those groups to start to hear the different perspectives. If you surround yourself with the exact same people, you're never going to hear anybody else's perspective.
Yeah, and I love that you talked about that because I was telling Kyle, we do an annual physical agility test for our whole department. So the fire chief down, we have to do it. It's similar to CPAT, but it's for incumbents. And when we first started doing that test, I was just out of the academy and it was always like if I struggled with something, it was like, hey, go find female firefighter such and such. She can show you. Well, now shift the mindset. Like the guys that are administering the test should be a part of, hey, I can help every different type of firefighter. Here's some stuff. Let me show you. It shouldn't just be, hey, go find another female to learn how to do this. So,
well, because let's be honest, in the recruiting space that we're in right now, there's plenty of young men that are coming into the fire service that, and I'm sure you talk about this generationally, they need more help than we've ever needed before. And we can keep continuing to say, well, they've got to be here already by the time we get to them. Or we have to look at it and be like, okay, there's more work we have to do here, right? Because that's what's coming to us. And in this recruitment crisis that we have, we do not have the time or the ability to say no to these people and just move on because there's not another pool to get from.
right.
So we have to be able, like some of these other male firefighters we're going to have to teach as well. We have to bring them up to the same, we have to bring them up too. So I think learning that ability to, be more patient, right? Is going to be key to anybody who's training firefighters these days, right? Like I see it in the probationary firefighters that I teach and train. I would imagine you would hear that professed from a lot of academy people. If they're doing a good job, they recognize like we got to do more here. That's just how it is.
Yeah, it's a completely different from when I was in the fire academy. And even when I first started teaching fire academies, it's just a whole different mindset. And it's not bad. It's,
No.
it's not bad.
Mm-mm.
And sometimes it's, man, I wish I could have gone through an academy that considered some of these things. And
Yeah.
my life would
Yeah. I
have been.
mean, they don't have the mechanical aptitudes that we grew up with. It's just they don't. It's a different culture. And if you go back to when I was a young firefighter, the senior firefighters at the table were talking about my generation too and how much they were
Oh, yeah.
terrible. So this is an age-old issue that everybody deals with, right?
Yeah, and it's almost like we could get rid of it, right? We just need to start teaching what it means to be adaptable and what true leadership looks like, right? It's not getting people to come buy into what you think. It is reading what is coming into your industry and how do I adjust as a leader to meet the needs of the people that are going out to do the job. And it's like that shift in mindset, but sometimes it's like changing that mindset is so hard. And you're just like, it's so easy though. Like stop thinking about yourself and focus on the people that are coming into our job and the people that we want coming into the job and focus on them, because the more you move up, the less it's about you and the more it's about the people coming into our organization. So I think that was a great point. As we get close to wrapping it up here, what do you got on the horizon here for Fire Service Women of Illinois this summer, future conferences, things going on?
So in September, we are doing a full training day down at Illinois Fire Service Institute. So we're working on that. We're going to have live burns. There's going to be an extrication piece. So we're really excited about that. We're going to try to do some kind of just really social get together over the summer. We haven't really plotted that out quite yet, but we're going to do just like a night out for the women of the fire service. As I've said, we just finished that leadership conference, which was phenomenal. I couldn't have been happier with the way that went. So that's kind of what the plan is for this year. We're growing every day, which is exciting. There's over 400 women that we have. Yeah, I know it's super exciting. So, we're continuing to grow, looking for the opportunities. Really what drives us is the membership. What do they want? What are they looking for? So we're constantly in touch with them to see, what do we need to bring to you guys? What are the training opportunities that you guys need? And then just always being that networking space, looking at, things that help them as far as, the policies in their organizations, those kinds of things. So yeah, that's kind of what we're doing this year.
Awesome. And yeah, to all our listeners, you could check out their website, fswi.org. Make sure to follow them on all their social media outlets. You got Facebook, Instagram, all that fun stuff, right?
Yep. And that's really where we post sort of like we do mass emailing out, but if you're not on our email list, then we post everything, all of our training and networking events on our social media. That's kind of where we put everything out.
Awesome. That sounds really good.
I'm super jealous. I want to join.
Yeah.
But I have to say, Chief Sam Green here in Virginia is president of the Women of Virginia organization that we have, and she's amazing too.
She is. And Chief Stone
and these things are like
Roanoke.
I think everybody can do these. Like a lot of these women's organizations for the fire service are just grassroots organizations, right? So like I would say to anybody listening out there that if you don't have one of these in your state, well, then start one, right? Like I promise you, it's that if you build it, they will come. It's true. If you build it, they will come. So there are people in your state that want the same thing. So build it. We had somebody from, I want to say it was Missouri, reached out and they didn't have one and they were looking to start one and kind of asked us for bylaws and all those kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, be that organization for your state. Obviously, there's the Women in Fire organization, which is the kind of international organization, which has exciting stuff out there. But yeah, I think these are important. Make changes where you can make changes, right? So, you and I have age and leadership abilities, which gives us the opportunity to try to make some effective changes within our organizations and with the fire service. And, I'm happy to put my mouth out there if that's what helps. But, I think even small things, right? Like when we came to our organization and said we wanted to run this youth camp with the other firefighters I work with, they were all for it. They were super excited and very, very supportive. We have a wonderful mayor in our community, and she has been just so supportive of this program. So, if it's something you're thinking about, reach out to us, reach out to any of these organizations. And, that's what I did. I just emailed places that had camps and said, hey, how did you do this? Right. And I think anybody can do those things. And it really does help to move the needle.
That's amazing.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time today. Appreciate the conversation. It's always fun chatting and talking all things leadership and challenges that are being faced. And every conversation, that's how change happens. Just keep on talking and keep the conversation going. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate coming on. It was nice chatting with you guys.
Awesome. Until the next time, this has been Kyle and for Carrie on the Heat of Command podcast. We'll see you next time. As we wrap up another episode, this has been Kyle
And Carrie
from the Heat of Command podcast.
Thank you, as always, for listening. Please make sure to follow and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And as always, we love the feedback. Keep it coming.
See you next time.